On a quiet station orbiting a distant star, the team of young scientists worked tirelessly. They had spent years in the dark reaches of space tracking cosmic phenomena, but nothing had prepared them for what they found one ordinary evening, when the station's systems detected an anomaly, faint at first, but persistent, a signal, a pattern of energy undulating through the void. No one knew its origin or its purpose, but it was there like a whisper across the stars. The signal had been drifting for eons, long before humanity even learned to look up at the night sky. They had seen strange things before: bursts of gamma rays from distant supernovas, unexplained solar flares, mysterious gravitational anomalies. But nothing like this. It was not random, it was deliberate. Every frequency in the signal seemed to align with precision, like the markings of a map, a puzzle waiting to be solved. The data flooded their consoles, and the hum of anticipation filled the room. The youngest among them, Lina Carter, was the first to voice what they all felt. The signal was artificial. It was a message. It had to be. She had worked her whole life for a moment like this, a chance to unlock the secrets of the universe. And now it was happening. She turned to the others, her face lit by the glow of the monitors. "We have to decode it," she said, the excitement clear in her voice. The older members of the team were more cautious, but even they couldn't deny the allure of the discovery. The station director, Dr. Ethan Saunders, a man who had spent his career studying the unknown, leaned in and studied the signal as it pulsed on the screen. "This is unprecedented, Lina," he said slowly, "but we need to be careful. No one has ever encountered anything like this before. We need to ensure it's not a trap." Lina nodded, but her determination never wavered. The team dove into the data, immediately breaking it down segment by segment. The signal seemed to be a complex series of mathematical sequences designed to be deciphered with patience and care. They worked long hours, and every passing moment drew them closer to understanding the truth of the signal. And with each breakthrough, the excitement in the air grew palpable. But then something strange happened. After several days of decoding, they noticed something unexpected. As they pieced together more of the sequence, they began to receive a reply, a second signal, faint but unmistakable, responding directly to their own. It was as if the universe had been waiting for them to act, and now that they had, it was answering them back. At first they couldn't believe it. Had to be a coincidence, maybe an error in the system or interference from a nearby asteroid. But as the reply grew clearer, their doubts began to fade. The message was too deliberate, too well-formed, to be anything other than a response, a sign that someone or something out there had received their transmission. The realization sent a chill through the room. The message hadn't been meant for humanity. The signal had been sent long before humans even existed, but now it had reached them. Somehow the ancient creators of the signal had vanished long ago, and yet the message remained like a beacon through the darkness, waiting for someone to respond. Lina felt a rush of exhilaration mixed with uncertainty. She had always dreamed of first contact, but this was different. The signal was not meant for humans, but somehow they had found it and responded. Now they would face the consequences of that decision, unaware of how it would change everything they had ever known. Days passed since the first reply from the void, and the team couldn't shake the feeling that they had triggered something much larger than they had anticipated. The initial excitement was quickly replaced with a creeping sense of unease. Their communication with the mysterious source had escalated far too quickly. The signal had not only responded, but had now grown more intricate. Each new pulse felt like a call to something ancient and powerful. It seemed almost as if the unknown entity was waiting for them to understand its language, like an invitation waiting to be accepted. Lina Carter was the most intrigued. She found herself spending sleepless nights analyzing the new patterns that had begun to emerge. Each fragment of data revealed something more complex and terrifying. At the same time, as she typed away furiously on her console, her fingers almost moving on their own, the realization struck her like a sudden thunderclap. This was no simple message. This was a test, a challenge, something far more deliberate than they could have imagined. Dr. Ethan Saunders watched her with growing concern as she decoded yet another sequence. The lights of the station flickered slightly and a low hum filled the room, almost as if the very structure of their ship was responding to the incoming transmission. The more they unraveled the signal, the clearer it became that this wasn't some isolated beacon from an ancient civilization. It was a structured series of instructions designed to provoke a response from any intelligent species capable of listening. He walked over to her side. "What are we looking at, Lena?" he asked, his voice calm but heavy with doubt. Lena paused, her fingers hovering over the console for a moment as she looked up at him. "We've only just begun to scratch the surface," she said. "The patterns are too precise. There's something deliberate about this. It's like they want us to reply, like it's been waiting for us to respond all this time." Saunders frowned. "Something doesn't sit right with me," he admitted, but Lena was already too deep in the data to hear his warning. Her eyes gleamed with excitement and fear combined. She understood the risk, but she also understood the opportunity. This was history unfolding before them, a chance to prove humanity's place in the galaxy, to show that they were more than just a blip in the universe. And so they replied again, a simple message acknowledging the complexity of the signals and offering a more detailed response. This time they used a more advanced mathematical framework, hoping to show the sender that they understood the nature of the conversation, at least in part. They sent it out into the abyss, waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. What came back was something unexpected. The signal shifted dramatically, its frequency pulsed, and then a voice appeared for the first time, not just a series of sounds or signals, but actual words in a language so foreign yet somehow comprehensible. The voice was cold, metallic, and strangely distant. It reverberated through the station like a deep echo. And though the words were deciphered immediately, the meaning still carried an undercurrent of something sinister, something urgent. "We are the Orcs," the voice said. "Your signal has been received and understood. You have made the first step, but now the trial begins." Lena's heart raced as the implications of the words settled in her mind. A trial? What kind of trial were they talking about? This wasn't just an exchange of knowledge or culture. This was something far more serious. She exchanged a glance with Saunders, who had gone pale. The room felt suddenly much smaller, as if they were being watched by eyes far beyond their comprehension. Before they could react, the voice continued, "You must prove your worth or risk the consequences. Prepare yourselves." The signal cut off abruptly, leaving the room in silence. The hum that had filled the air faded into an eerie stillness, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Lena sat frozen for a moment, then turned slowly to the team. "We've done something we didn't fully understand," she whispered. "The trial begins now." The message from the Orcs echoed in the minds of the team as they sat in stunned silence. The implications were overwhelming. What trial were they being called to face? And who were the Orcs? Really the advanced species behind the signal? Were they allies, or something far more dangerous? As the days passed, the initial shock began to wear off, and the team, now united by a shared sense of urgency, began to plan their next move. Lena Carter could barely sleep, her mind racing with possibilities. The challenge ahead seemed to promise something both exhilarating and terrifying. But as she reviewed the transmission over and over again, it became clear the Orcs were testing them, testing humanity. And it was up to them to figure out how to pass that test. The trial could be anything they could imagine: puzzles to solve, technologies to unlock, or worse, something they hadn't even conceived of yet. But it wasn't just Lena who felt the weight of the situation. Even the usually composed Dr. Ethan Saunders couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of his stomach. Every moment since the Orcs' words had left their ears, there was something about the coldness in their voice that didn't sit right with him. They weren't just offering a challenge, they were giving an ultimatum: prove your worth or face the consequences. The thought haunted him. And yet they had no choice but to continue the investigation. The station's systems were still receiving faint signals from the Orcs, like a beacon calling them onward, guiding them forward, as if the alien intelligence was watching and waiting for their next step. Across the globe, governments and military agencies had begun to notice the strange activity in space. While the public remained unaware of the true nature of the signal, there was a growing unease among the political leaders of Earth. What had started as a scientific breakthrough had quickly become a matter of global concern. They didn't understand what the team on the station had uncovered, but they knew that humanity was no longer in control of the situation. Within hours of the transmission, the United Nations had convened an emergency session. Top-level officials debated what actions to take, what precautions to set in place. The idea of a full-scale response was floated, sending more military satellites to monitor the situation, perhaps even launching a counter-signal to assert humanity's readiness for whatever the Orcs's trial might entail. But there was one voice among them that spoke against hasty action. Vincent Juno, the leading astrophysicist who had been called in to advise them on the matter, stood firm against the idea of military escalation. "We don't know who or what we're dealing with," he insisted. "We're being tested here in ways we don't understand. If we respond with fear, we may doom ourselves before we even have a chance to see what's really happening." Despite his warnings, the voices of militarization grew louder. They could not risk ignoring the possibility of an alien threat, and as the discussion continued, the world's eyes were slowly turning towards the signal, no longer an isolated event in the cosmos, but a global issue that would define the future of humanity. Back at the station, Lena and her team continued their work, knowing they had little time before the trial would begin. They couldn't afford to get distracted by the growing political turmoil back on Earth. The signal was still coming in stronger now, a rhythmic pulse that seemed almost like a heartbeat. They had to focus on deciphering the patterns on the screen, on the messages hidden within the alien language, on what the Orcs expected of them. The pressure was mounting, but so was their determination. They knew that humanity's future, if not its very survival, depended on how they responded to what was coming next. Then, without warning, the signal shifted again. It wasn't just a response now, it was a command: prepare for the trial. You will be judge. The first test will come within the hour. The team froze, their hearts racing as they realized the moment they'd feared had arrived. The trial was beginning now, and there was no turning back. The countdown had begun, and the first test was about to unfold. The once quiet station now hummed with tension as Lena and her team stared at the screens, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity alike. The signal was relentless, its steady pulse, like a ticking clock counting down to something unknown. They had anticipated a trial of intellect, or perhaps technology, but what they didn't expect was the sudden shift in the signal structure. It was as if the very air around them had become charged with energy. The station's systems flickered briefly, as if they were being monitored or even manipulated from afar. Lena felt her heartbeat quicken. The signal had intensified, and it was no longer just a passive exchange. It had become an active force, demanding something in return. The language on their screens was no longer the structured code they had been decoding, but a series of geometric shapes and patterns twisting and shifting, as though the signal was teaching them a new way to think, something alien and far beyond their comprehension, at least for now. Suddenly, the voice of the Orcs filled the room again, cold and metallic like before, but now with a sense of finality, a deep voice that reverberated through their bones. The first test will be one of calculation. You must prove your understanding of the universe. Lena swallowed hard. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what the Orcs could possibly mean by understanding of the universe. The challenge wasn't just about solving equations or manipulating symbols. It was something far more profound. The signal had to be testing their very grasp of reality itself, their ability to comprehend the structure of existence itself. The first challenge appeared on the main console, a set of impossibly complex numbers and patterns that seemed to defy the very laws of physics as they knew them, impossible to calculate using any human framework. But then, as Lena stared at the numbers, a realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. It was not the equations they needed to solve. It was the perspective they needed to change. She quickly turned to her team, shifting her thoughts into overdrive. "We've been looking at this all wrong," she said. "We need to think outside our human understanding. The patterns are shifting in ways that defy everything we know. But if we look at it from a higher dimension, we might be able to make sense of it." The others stared at her, as if she'd lost her mind. But Lena's eyes were focused on the screen with a kind of intensity they had never seen before. She knew she had to act quickly if they were going to stand a chance at surviving the Orcs' trial. She reached for the station's 3D visualization tools and began to rotate the patterns in every direction possible, trying to find the hidden truth embedded in the shapes. As the shapes slowly aligned and the numbers began to make sense, the team watched in awe. Lena spoke softly as if talking to herself, but everyone heard her words like a revelation. We're looking at it backwards. She said the patterns are folding into higher dimensions. This is about how the universe operates in multiple planes at once, not just one static reality. As if in response to her breakthrough, the signal shifted once more, and the room seemed to grow colder. The voice of the Orcscary echoed once again. You have solved the first test, but this is just the beginning. Prepare for the second challenge. Lena exhaled sharply, her pulse racing. She had done it, they had done it, but her sense of victory was fleeting. The enormity of what lay ahead began to sink in. If the first test had been this difficult, what would the second challenge entail? Across the station, the team exchanged nervous glances. The Orcscary weren't just testing their intelligence. They were testing their ability to see beyond the limits of their own understanding and to unlock truths that might be far too vast for human minds to process. But they had no choice now. They had passed the first hurdle, but there was still so much more to face, and the trial was far from over. As the second challenge loomed in the darkness ahead, they had to stay focused. They had to keep moving forward into the unknown, no matter how terrifying it became. The echo of the Orcscary's words lingered in the air long after the signal had cut off, and the team, though relieved to have passed the first challenge, now found themselves with a sense of impending dread. The unknown stretched out before them, vast and infinite. If the first trial had tested their understanding of dimensions, what would the second demand? Would it push them to the brink of their humanity? The team knew they couldn't afford to waste time pondering the implications. The challenge was growing, and with it, the weight of responsibility. As the days passed, their isolation in space became increasingly oppressive. Lena Carter, once filled with an almost childlike excitement, now felt a growing sense of unease gnaw at her. She had spent years dreaming of discovery, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The team, though united in purpose, felt the strain of the pressure. They weren't just solving puzzles anymore. They were facing something far greater than any human mind had ever been asked to comprehend. Back on Earth, things were beginning to spiral. The initial excitement of first contact had quickly turned to fear, confusion, and political tension. What was once a scientific breakthrough was now a matter of global security. Governments began to mobilize, sending their brightest minds to try to understand the signal from their own perspectives, though they were working with limited knowledge. The military, too, began to react with caution. What if the Orcscary were a threat, not a benevolent force? What if humanity had made a fatal mistake by engaging with them? Lena's phone buzzed, an encrypted message from Dr. Vincent Juno, the astrophysicist advising the UN on the signal. His tone was direct and urgent. Lena, the world is watching. It's no longer just about your team. You've become the linchpin for all of humanity's future. They need answers, and soon. Whatever the Orcscary have planned next, you're the key. She stared at the message, feeling the gravity of it settling in her chest. It wasn't just about science anymore. The world was depending on them, and they didn't know if they were prepared to meet whatever was coming next. The team had to make a decision. They couldn't just solve puzzles in isolation. They needed to unify all of humanity's resources. The challenges they faced were too great for any single group to solve, no matter how brilliant. They had to bring the world together, or they risked losing everything. Lena called an emergency video conference. The faces of the team members appeared on the large screen in front of her. Ethan Saunders was the first to speak, his voice low but steady. We can't keep this to ourselves. The Orcscary are testing all of humanity, not just our team. The trial they've set up isn't just for scientists or mathematicians, it's for every human being. We need to find a way to unite the best minds from all over the world. There's no other way to survive this. Lena nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. If we try to solve this alone, we'll fail. This isn't just about intellect anymore. It's about how we work together. We need to create a global coalition, a network of minds and resources, if we want to stand a chance at facing the next test. The idea was clear. Humanity had to act as one. Scientists, engineers, artists, philosophers, and political leaders. Every skill, every perspective had to be brought to bear. It wasn't enough to rely on intellect alone. They would need creativity, empathy, and collective willpower to understand the challenges ahead. Ethan, ever the realist, added, "But we'll need a way to keep this under control. If the military gets involved directly without understanding the Oroscary's methods, it could escalate quickly. We can't afford to panic." The others nodded in agreement. And soon, Lina's team began laying the groundwork for an international network. Communications were opened with various governments, think tanks, and academic institutions. Conferences were set up to pool knowledge, resources, and insights from across the globe. No one could afford to sit on the sidelines anymore. As Lina looked around at the faces of her team, she realized something profound. This challenge wasn't just about answering the Oroscary's tests. It was about how humanity would respond to the unknown, how they would come together in the face of a cosmic trial. It was no longer just about science or survival. It was about proving that humanity, despite its flaws, had the potential to rise above itself. And in that moment, she knew what they had to do. The Oroscary might have set the stage, but it was humanity's time to shine. The trial ahead would not be faced alone. It would be faced together. The day the second challenge arrived, the team at the station was on edge. They had spent the last few days preparing, sharing information with scientists and thinkers from around the world, and building the network that would make their collective knowledge a force strong enough to face whatever came next. Yet, despite their efforts, an undercurrent of anxiety ran through every conversation. The Oroscary had made it clear humanity's worth was on the line, and they were about to test more than just intellect. The signal from the Oroscary arrived just as the world had begun to hold its breath. It wasn't just another pulse or series of shapes this time. It was a sequence of images, concepts, and emotions that rippled through the minds of every person who was tuned in. The room on the station grew cold as the data streamed in. Lina, Ethan, and the rest of the team gathered around the main console, their eyes glued to the screen, watching as the images shifted and twisted. The symbols were recognizable, yet completely alien in their arrangement, as if the Oroscary were pulling humanity's attention to something far deeper than physics or mathematics. "You have proven your intellect," the voice of the Oroscary intoned, its metallic resonance sending chills through the room. "Now, you will be tested in another way." Lina's heart pounded. This was it, the test they feared. The previous challenge had been about unlocking the mysteries of the universe. This one was different. It wasn't about solving problems with logic or calculation. It was about humanity's heart, its capacity for empathy, understanding, and sacrifice. The signal unfolded further, and the next images took shape. They were scenes, images of distant, barren planets, desolate civilizations, and species reaching the precipice of their own extinction. The Oroscary showed the rise and fall of entire societies, civilizations so advanced that their technology could alter the very fabric of reality itself, yet they still failed to overcome the most basic challenges of survival: compassion, unity, and moral choices. Some species had thrived for millennia, but collapsed from within, their inability to work together or put the common good before individual greed bringing about their downfall. Others had ascended to great power only to self-destruct in the face of their own technology. "What will you choose, humans?" the voice asked, the finality in its tone sending a shiver down Lina's spine. "Will you rise above the failures of others, or will you fall like them?" A massive image filled the screen, a scene of destruction, a planet torn apart by conflict and war, its inhabitants locked in a never-ending cycle of violence. Lina felt a heavy knot in her stomach. It was a vision of Earth's future, a future where humanity failed to unite, where old conflicts festered, and the promise of progress was destroyed by division. The voice continued, its chilling words echoing in the silence of the room. "The trial is not about who you are, but who you will become. The decision is yours. Will you choose unity peace, and cooperation? Or will you allow your weaknesses to tear you apart? Lena's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a test of intelligence. It was a test of humanity's very soul. The Orcs weren't simply asking them to solve complex problems. They were asking whether humanity could rise above its own flaws and see the bigger picture, to understand that their survival, their very future, depended not on technology or knowledge alone, but on their ability to come together as a species and make difficult choices. As the images flickered and shifted, Lena saw the faces of people across the world: politicians, military leaders, scientists, ordinary citizens, caught in the same dilemma. The challenge wasn't just about the team on the station anymore. It was about every person on Earth. The world needed to choose whether it would cooperate and work toward the common good or remain fractured and divided, allowing the trial to unravel them. The room was silent as the team digested the full weight of the challenge. Ethan was the first to speak, his voice steady but heavy with realization. This is a test of our values, of how we face the hardest decisions. It's not about whether we can beat the Orcs at their own game. It's about whether we can prove that humanity is capable of choosing the right path, even when it's hard. Lena nodded, her thoughts racing. She had always believed that humanity was capable of greatness, but this trial forced her to confront the reality of their situation. The world wasn't just facing a cosmic test. They were facing a test of their very character, whether they could work together, put aside old grievances, and choose to create a future built on peace and collaboration. Could they overcome their flaws? Could they rise above the cycles of conflict and division that had plagued Earth for so long? The answer wasn't clear, but the world had to try. And with that, Lena made a decision. The only way humanity could pass this test was together, united in purpose, in heart, and in action. The Orcs had given them a choice. Now, it was up to them to prove they were ready for the future. The weight of the second challenge was like a heavy storm cloud hanging over Earth. The signal from the Orcs had forced humanity to confront its greatest flaws. The stakes were no longer about technology or even survival in the traditional sense. The Orcs had drawn the line. Would humanity come together, or would they be doomed to repeat the same mistakes that had plagued countless other civilizations? Lena Carter sat in the control room of the station, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The images from the Orcs, those stark visions of destruction, still haunted her mind. She knew that the challenge was as much about self-reflection as it was about collective action. It wasn't just about solving a problem in isolation. It was about finding a way to unite the world's fragmented efforts and create something greater than the sum of its parts. The messages between the team on the station and the global network they had established were moving at an unprecedented pace. Politicians, scientists, military leaders, activists, and thinkers from across the world were all working together in real time, sharing ideas, strategies, and a deep sense of responsibility. The Orcs had forced the world to face its most uncomfortable truth. Without unity, the future was uncertain. Humanity's fractured nature, the divisions of culture, politics, and ideology, had to be overcome if they were to pass this trial. Lena's eyes moved from the monitor to her team members, who were scattered around the room, each focused on their own tasks. They had sent out a call for action. The world was listening. Governments, corporations, and institutions had finally come to realize that this was not just a cosmic test. It was a test of their survival, a test of humanity's potential to rise above its own nature. She watched the message from Earth's leaders, now flooding in from all corners of the globe. In response to the Orcs' demand for cooperation, leaders had called for a series of global summits, hastily organized but full of urgency. The UN, which had been fragmented and largely ineffective in recent years, now found itself at the center of the world's efforts. The first of many collaborative sessions took place between world governments, scientists, and philosophers, all trying to answer the Orcs' challenge in real time. Everyone was scrambling, but there was a new energy in the air, a sense that they were on the verge of something extraordinary. In her mind, Lena knew this wasn't just a scientific or political effort anymore. It was a moral one. There were still powerful forces in the world that wanted to control the message, to frame the trial as a military conflict. But the people, the leaders, the thinkers, and the dreamers knew better. They were coming together not to fight against an alien force, but to prove to the Orcsari, and to themselves, that humanity had learned to evolve past its divisions. The Orcsari had shown them a vision of destruction, yes, but they had also given them a rare opportunity to prove that they could choose a different path. The collaboration wasn't without its struggles. There were disagreements over strategy, especially concerning military preparedness and resource distribution. But even in these moments of tension, the necessity of cooperation became clear. The leaders and thinkers, though varied in their opinions and goals, were all forced to recognize one universal truth: there was no future for humanity without unity. The trial they faced wasn't something they could defeat with weapons or isolation. It had to be faced with a commitment to shared purpose, understanding, and the courage to take the first steps toward peace. In her heart, Lena could feel the shift happening. It was subtle, but it was there, a collective recognition that the time for division was over. The world wasn't perfect, far from it, but the response to the Orcsari's trial was proof that humanity still had the capacity for change. People were setting aside old grudges, choosing to work together instead of apart, looking beyond their borders, their ideologies, and their fears. The Orcsari had pushed them to the brink, but instead of breaking them, they had forged something stronger in their place. The voices of world leaders echoed in Lena's earpiece, calling for greater collaboration, for immediate action. And then, as if on cue, the Orcsari's signal flickered back to life, its rhythmic pulse a steady reminder that their trial was not over yet. The voice spoke again, calm but resonant. "You have chosen unity, but your true test lies ahead. Prepare yourselves." The world was not the same as it had been just days before. It was stronger, more connected, and more determined. The challenge was far from over, but now, humanity stood together, united for the first time in history, ready to face whatever came next. Lena glanced at her team, and in that moment, she understood the true meaning of the trial. The Orcsari had not simply been testing their intelligence or their will to survive. They had been testing their hearts, and humanity had passed. The signal from the Orcsari had paused, but the pulse still lingered, a low hum that seemed to resonate in the bones of everyone on Earth. Lena Carter sat at the console, staring at the screen, her mind still processing everything that had happened. She had watched the world unite in ways no one had ever thought possible. Leaders who once stood in opposition now spoke in harmony. Scientists who once competed for resources were pooling their knowledge, and civilians across the globe were working together toward a common goal. Humanity had shown the Orcsari that they were capable of transcending their own divisions. But now, they were about to face the final test. The countdown had begun. This would be the moment where everything would either fall into place or shatter irreparably. There would be no more room for mistakes. The Orcsari's voice, once cold and distant, now filled the room with a deeper intensity. It had been almost a week since the last transmission, and the silence had been excruciating. The wait had been necessary. The collective global effort to unify and prepare was still ongoing. But now, they were ready. Now, they had to face the Orcsari one last time. "Humanity has proven that it is capable of unity," the voice said, its resonance now strangely almost admiring. "This final trial is not one of intellect, nor of strength. It is a trial of choice. You have learned the value of cooperation, but the true test lies within your future. You have made great strides, but the decision you make now will shape not only your future but the very fabric of your civilization." Lena leaned forward, her heart racing. This wasn't just another challenge to solve. It was a decision that would impact the course of history. It was a decision about how humanity would shape its future, a future now intertwined with the unknown. You will be given a choice, the Orcs continued, a path of expansion and endless power, where your technology could grow to unimaginable heights, or a path of restraint, where you limit your advancement in favor of protecting the balance of the universe. The future will be determined by this choice. Choose wisely. The room went still. This was it. The Orcs had shown them the extremes of what was possible, the two paths that stretched before humanity. The first path promised unprecedented technological advancement, the ability to conquer worlds, bend the laws of nature, and create a galaxy-spanning empire. But the cost, they knew, would be steep. The unchecked use of such power could lead to chaos, the same destructive cycles that had caused countless civilizations to crumble before them. Humanity could end up as another lost star in the endless expanse of space. The second path, the path of restraint, would require humanity to turn away from such ambitions, to limit their power, to choose balance over dominance. It would mean growing at a more deliberate pace, ensuring that their progress didn't come at the expense of others, that they maintained harmony with the universe, avoiding the temptation of godlike control. Lena's eyes flicked over to the team. All of them gathered around her, each of them feeling the weight of the decision. Ethan Saunders stood closest to her, his expression grim but resolute. He understood what was at stake. This wasn't just a choice between two paths. It was a choice between two futures. The final decision would not be theirs alone, though. It was up to all of humanity. Through the network they had created, every human, from leaders to ordinary citizens, could contribute their voice, their vote. And though the decision felt monumental, Lena believed in humanity's capacity for wisdom. The past had shown them the dangers of unchecked power, but it had also shown them that they were capable of change. They were capable of choosing balance over destruction. Lena took a deep breath and spoke into the silence. "We've come this far together," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "And we can do this. We can choose a future where we build, not conquer. A future where we reach for the stars, but never forget what it means to protect the balance of life." She pressed a button, initiating the global response. The votes were being counted, each decision representing a voice, a hope for a future where humanity would prove that it had learned from the past. The final choice was about more than just survival. It was about what kind of civilization humanity wanted to become. And as the minutes ticked by, Lena knew they had done it. The world had chosen unity, restraint, and wisdom over unchecked ambition. The Orcs had tested them, and they had passed. The voice of the Orcs filled the room once more, this time softer, almost approving. "Humanity has chosen wisely. You have passed the final test. You will be allowed to enter the next phase of your evolution." The signal ceased. The silence was profound, but now it felt different. It felt hopeful. The trial had ended, and humanity had chosen a future together. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. They were no longer alone in the universe, and they were ready for what came next.